this is a really good Destiny example. So this is one where he actually does this, and I think it's super effective for him. So to preface this conversation, basically, Destiny, this is where like a leftist video call of some sort is going on, and there's all these people trash talking him. So he sees that, he has to join. I think Mindwaves gets him in there, and he talks to people, and they get to say their whole piece, and then he lets them say all of what they're saying, doesn't interrupt them at all, and then deals with it. He's very calm, very collected in this, and I think that benefits him a lot. Let's go ahead and check out this video.
Years, and that's why that's all my responses to everything.
Pause. Oh, is this BM that I'm opening this on like some clip channel and not Destiny's channel? I just realized I could probably find this on his channel as well. No, it's taking forever to load. Let's see, what else can we go through, chat? Yeah, as you guys can see, I have like notes prepped on that, so we're good to go. Just waiting for it to... Okay, there we go. I'm going to open this in the other whatever, and we'll go through this. Oh, it's still loading.
5 years, and that's all my responses to everything you said.
Vivian, you had problems with Destiny as well, right? Do you want to do that as well? Do you want to, or is it are we just doing one at a time? Yeah.
I mean, I said I don't think that like the conversation that I had with Destiny post Alabel, I felt like he wanted to railroad me into like the scientific argument and completely ignored like the philosophical argument around having that conversation. But that's that's neither here nor there.
Okay, so let's look at like what the structure of this is for anybody who may struggle with that part, because I don't know how many people actually struggle with like structure and logic. So we're going to go through both parts here, both the rhetoric and kind of the structure and logic part. So Vivian is opening up with this line here, and what is this doing for us? Well, it's giving us context for the rest of the discussion. Now, the end of this line is, but that's neither here nor there, and then they're going to open up into their argument. But this whole quote right here, all that's doing is to kind of give us some like emotional or whatever context going into this argument that they're about to have. I think it's kind of a shitty thing to do, but maybe that's a hindsight thing. I'm sure they were heated, whatever. I just think this is a little shitty to do, to open it up with that, and then, but that's neither here nor there, so he can't argue against it. Maybe I'm looking too deep into it, but we're going to continue.
I think also like Destiny just said that like Mike was like encouraging people in his chat to come and call him Gusano, or he had no problem with it or whatever. I don't watch a lot of fucking Destiny's content, but I did catch a little bit of his conversation with Mike, or one of his conversations with Mike recently, where Mike like pretty explicitly said that he thought that was a really shitty thing to do and people shouldn't be doing that.
Can I, just to be really clear on that, Mike,
okay, so let's actually we'll let the whole argument play out and then we'll go through it, but I'll have the text and highlights on the screen and we'll kind of explain what that means in a second.
Multiple times repeated during our conversation that he had no problem with anybody in his community calling me a Gusano, and it was used over 200 times in his chat against me while we were talking about it, and he defended it explicitly in our conversation.
I mean, I remember you saying about this fucking 200 times and shit, and Mike's response was just like that people shouldn't be doing that in the chat. Like, obviously that's bad.
He didn't ban a single person for it. If I had people in my chat that were spamming...
He didn't ban a single person for it, no, I don't think he did.
Sure, if I was having a conversation with a trans person and everyone in my chat was spamming tranny or something, and I said, well, I think they shouldn't do that, and I didn't ban anybody or take any type of action against them, do you think that would be an appropriate response for me?
No, of course not.
Okay, so why wouldn't you hold Mike to the same standards there?
And that's a hanger, and people will start laughing or whatever because he got him. Now, how did that happen? Let's go through it. So firstly, this isn't our heated Destiny. This isn't Debate Lord Destiny. This isn't Being Mean Destiny. This is calm and collected Destiny. And anything he's doing that's mean is very, I think it's done well here. It's not crazy. So after Vivian gives us this initial context, they say, I think that also, Destiny just said, that Mike was encouraging people in his chat to come and call him Gusano, or he had no problem with it. So we have these two things in one. So we have Mike was encouraging people in his chat to come and call him Gusano, or he had no problem with it. Now these are two different things, right? But Vivian doesn't make a distinction. But these are two very different claims. So on the one hand, we have him saying he was encouraging people in his chat to come and call him Gusano. Encouraging, I put as bold because I think that's kind of the extra there. And then we have he had no problem with it. So being indifferent to it is different than encouraging it. And so those are two things that we're sticking together for some reason here. I don't watch a lot of Destiny's content, but I did catch a little bit of his conversation with Mike. I put this in purple because we're going to go through it later. When Mike pretty explicitly said he thought it was a pretty shitty thing to do and people shouldn't be doing that. Pretty explicitly said. So we're going to go through how Destiny uses the wording, Vivian's wording, against him. He thought it was a pretty shitty thing to do and people shouldn't be doing that. This is like, so these are both blue because these are two sides of the same coin here. So like on the one hand, he's saying, Destiny is saying that he was encouraging people in his chat to do it or that he had no problem with it. Either of those, I don't think they're true because Mike explicitly said he thought it was a pretty shitty thing to do and people shouldn't be doing that. So the main conceit of Vivian's argument here is that Mike explicitly said he thought it was a bad thing to do and that people shouldn't do it. And the context that we're given for that is a little bit of his conversation with Mike. This is important. So Vivian is not responding to the whole conversation. Vivian very clearly only saw a little part of it, and that's going to come up later. Do you want to start an argument off of that? No. If you only watched a little bit, I would really try to preface it with that. So like I learned this after doing the Hassan thing with Destiny. It came off like I was really pro Hassan, and that's because I didn't have enough context to know that like I probably shouldn't be siding with Hassan as quickly as I did or whatever, or I should be more careful to note the caveats about outside information, or that I'm trying to take the perspective of somebody that doesn't know about this stuff. I should have made that more clear. That context should have been given more often in our conversation because people came away not understanding that context, and it changes the whole way you view the conversation. Same here. This little bit is going to come up later. So Destiny's response. I started in green because this is like positive rhetoric that he does here. So this is like cutting away at his own whatever. So he says, just to be really clear on that, he's trying to ease into what he's saying like as easy as possible. He's not saying you're a liar, that's not true, whatever. He says just be really clear on that, which is implying that it's not true, but we get that subtly, so it's done very well. Mike explicitly, notice he uses the same thing explicitly. This is what makes it partly funny to me. You're using the same wording. That's really good. Mike explicitly, multiple times, repeated during our conversation. So this multiple times repeated thing, that gives us some emphasis. That's repetition. Multiple times repeated during our conversation. So this whole idea we could say relates, this idea of multiple times repetition during our conversation. So like, I know you only caught a little bit of this conversation, but he said a lot, like multiple times throughout that conversation, that he had no problem with anybody in his community calling him Gusano, right? And so look at the parallelism here. So we had pretty explicitly said that he thought it was a pretty shitty thing to do and people shouldn't be doing that. Mike explicitly multiple times repeated during our conversation that he had no problem with anybody in his chat calling me Gusano. On a side note, he says it was used over 200 times in his chat against me while we were talking about it, and he defended it explicitly in our conversation. This defended it explicitly. This is yellow because we're again trying to put those same words in there. In our conversation, this is purple because it ties back to the conversation thing. Notice the repetition of conversation as well as a word. We have a lot of subtle things Destiny's doing here, whether he's aware of them or not, that are going to help us to communicate why Vivian's wrong here. let's look at my commentary. So the repeat of explicitly is a nice rhetorical touch that I advise for everyone. Use the words of the person speaking to you. Your points will land better. It's more easily digestible for someone when it's wrapped in their own verbiage, right? It's going to go down easier. So to get your point across, it's easier to wrap it up in the way that the other person talks, the words that they use for stuff. Like, for instance, unrelated, but a practical example of how you, the viewer, might use this. At work, when people call me, I have to cover up a bunch of stuff, but I take call notes on little index cards, okay? And part of my call notes are keywords that the other person is using to me that I can tell are important to them. So I have noted for a conversation I had yesterday, words like trust, help, son, terrified, unknown, what to do. So these are keywords for me because they're things I feel like I can uniquely address. If you want someone you can trust, if you want someone that can help your son, and if you're terrified of the unknown and you don't know what to do, I'm here to help you, because not only am I a tutor for kids, I'm a tutor for adults. I'm uniquely positioned to explain to you exactly how we're going to help your son, what we're going to do moving forward, what lesson plans are, and explain every piece of the process along the way so that you're just as informed as your student. And that's what I'm selling to her, because that's what she needs. That's what she's asking me for and what she's saying. And so people give you words. They give you everything that they need. And if you just listen to them, you can meet that for them. You can be that person for them. So at work, obviously, this is super important. In tutoring, super important. If you're a doctor like Dr. K, super important. You debate. It's important. It's important in a lot of things to understand people. And once you start figuring out tricks like that, like writing down what words people seem to be repeating or putting emphasis on, it gives you an idea of what's going on in their head. Like what's repeating in their head. She's having issues with trust. Obviously, she had other tutors in the past, which I then asked about. Like, did you have other tutors? Yeah, they didn't work out. That's why trust is a problem, okay? Did you have issues with payment? Because trust could be a thing of payment. Maybe she paid somebody for a whole month and they never showed up. These little words, just single words, they can give me so much context as to what questions I should be asking or what services I should be offering or what I can do to help that person that yeah, of course I'm going to pay attention to them. It also helps to create a very clear distinction between beliefs. If Vivian explicitly attacks the idea Mike encouraged or even had no issue with it and uses what Mike says later as the counter, then you're set up for a home run if you can make an argument with those two logical points. So this is the idea of strangling somebody with their own words, right? Is that if she's giving me this logical structure, if Vivian says that the idea Mike encouraged or even had no idea or issue with it, and uses what Mike says later as the counter, if we can form an argument that mimics that exactly, that no, you're using something he said later to prove that he is not encouraging the chat. But I have the exact same thing, but opposite. I have Mike saying something about encouraging it. And a matter of fact, you're only pointing at one instance of it, but I can point out multiple repeated times. And if you want to go a step further, I can point out that over 200 times that it's happened in the chat. So I'm sorry if you only listened to a little bit of that conversation, but if you kept listening to the rest of it, I can point out a bunch of other times that this happens. And that's what he's communicating in a really, really nice way, right? He's not being a dick about it, and that's what's good there. So I'm going to check in with chat because I know that was probably a big heated thing. This is so helpful. Okay, cool. Is that a parallel thing, or make it? Can you move your cam to the left? Oh shit, my bad. Oh, to left. That's probably a lot smarter. See, you guys are brilliant. You're out of the box thinkers. Okay, we're gonna put it like that. I hope that's a little bit better for you guys. I'm sorry that I missed that. But I am going through the chat. Okay, so we're all caught up. Okay. So after he lands this, because it's so dense with arguments, so he says multiple explicit times, using the explicit thing to get that argument in, or really throws Vivian for a loop. Using multiple arguments, we see that the response are stutters and stammers. Now, I don't normally know everything, like likes or ums or using curse words, but I did in this particular quote because it's important. And I also noted the stammering because it's contextually important. So right after Destiny says this, there's stuttering and stammering, and then finally a response. So like, okay, we dipped a bit into the not good zone, but she picked herself back up and she continued. I remember you saying about the fucking 200 times and shit, and Mike's response was just like, that people shouldn't be doing that in the chat, and like, obviously that's bad. So the fucking and shit and whatever, it tells us something about what that person thinks about Destiny's ideas, or at least it communicates that, right? So we're frustrated because we had the stuttering and stammering coming out of the gate with an argument that landed really, really well. And then I remember you saying about the fucking 200 times and shit, like, dismissive. I don't really care about that. And Mike's response was just like, we're quickly moving out of that. We're quickly moving away from what Destiny's talking about. We're moving away from the point he just made. Notice how nothing in here responds to what Destiny said. He just says, I remember you saying that. But Mike's response was just, we're repeating ourselves. He's giving, they're giving the whatever. I'm not misgendering people. I just that people shouldn't be doing that in the chat, and like obviously that's bad. And this is like a more poorly worded version of the initial one too. So worth noting, I hand-waved the cursing before, but now it could have a considerable impact on the listener, because what comes next will be an equally potent rebuttal from Destiny, and the point here is a nearly word-for-word restatement of their prior point. So like, imagine that we're boxing, right? And we're fighting, and like, you have one hand down for some reason, and so I just like chat throws a left hook and just like hits me, and then I stutter and I stammer and I come back and my hand is still down. What are you gonna do? You're gonna bot me in the same way you bot me before, right? Because the same opening is still there. So if you just repeat the same idea and he kicked your ass on the last point, probably not a good idea. But I think this is because this person was taken so aback with the first comment that Destiny gave that they weren't really able to contend with or process what he said, and they weren't able to respond to it, and so they repeated themselves because they don't really understand what he's getting at, or it took them aback. But unfortunately, the result is that you gave them the exact same argument to then kick the shit out of again. So if they did a good job the first time, don't toss them the same thing. If you get stuck like this is why I tell Destiny, if you get stuck on something where you didn't read it or whatever, concede, bruh. Just concede really quick, because you don't know what's going to happen next. We're in the territory of unknown unknowns. If we're talking about a source you don't know about, or somebody presented an argument that knocked you on your ass, take a second or concede. Like, don't jump back into it unless you're super good at it. Like, Destiny could probably do that, but this person obviously can't, because they ended up naturally just throwing out the same thing again. He said he didn't ban a single person for it, okay? And then we have the interjection from Vivian, and Vivian says he didn't ban a single person for it. No, I don't think he did. That no, I don't think he did is green, because that's the agreement to the blue, which is Destiny's point. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So sure, the green, because now we have agreement. Like, okay, now we can build on this. So he didn't ban a single person for it. No, I don't think he did. Sure. If I was having a conversation with a trans person and everyone in my chat was spamming tranny or something, and I said like, well, I don't think they should do that, and I didn't ban anybody or take a type of action against them, do you think that would be an appropriate response from me? No, of course not. Okay, so why wouldn't you hold Mike to the same standards there? Bam, he gets her. Let's talk about why that is. So I have a color code to make it a bit easier. This purple is going to be our hypothetical. So Destiny likes using hypotheticals a lot. The problem is that sometimes his hypotheticals are about extreme cases, which is how we kind of figure out the edges of ideologies and stuff, sure, but not everybody responds super well to crazy hypotheticals. The hypothetical in this case, though, is super duper relevant. So he opens up with a premise to be established in the blue line about the bans, right here. He does that. Then he gets agreement, so he can move on to a hypothetical which very closely mirrors the situation. It is obviously relevant. The issue is that sometimes Destiny uses analogies or hypotheticals which seem radical or far off from any relation to the discussion. Here we have a lot of parallels. So like, just as Mike streams and talks to people, Destiny does too, obviously. It's reasonable to expect that their audiences could flame and spam something about something bad. So it's believable that either of their audiences could spam something like tranny. I don't mean to say DGGers or whatever. I'm just saying Twitch chat in general, it's believable that that could happen. So having the example be about a trans person specifically relates it to the experiences and worlds of the people in the call, and thus their audiences, which presumably understand their circumstances. In this call, it's a big lefty call, and we have a few trans people in the call. And all of the viewers of each of those trans people probably have some idea of the trans experience, right? And about the issues that these people are advocating for and discussing. So if we can incorporate that into our example, we add a little bit of extra weight in that. So if we can create a hypothetical not only that's parallel to like the logical things that we're talking about, but that has a context for everybody listening that gets them invested into it, that's really good. We don't want to waste these extra dimensions of the hypothetical with like radical ideas. Why would you do that? Like when you can make it something that's like handcrafted and relevant to what the other person is talking about, or what our audience can understand. We know it's unlikely they'll retreat because it's unlikely they'll pivot to defending a racial slur over conceding that Mike messed up and admitting they had it twisted. I say racial slur, but I guess this is like a transphobic slur. But either way, we know that the other person is backed into a corner with this hypothetical. And I think this is one that might take a bit of thinking to understand. But in context, Vivian and all of their friends are left-leaning. And obviously, all these left-leaning people are very much so against transphobic remarks. They're very much so against racial slurs. So if you start defending this take or arguing against Destiny with what he's put forward here in the hypothetical, you're going to be arguing for people's ability to say things like this, and that's exactly against their platform. So you know that Vivian can't retreat to that. Even if right now it seems like they're stumbling back and having a difficulty with the arguments, they for sure can't just randomly attack this because they're going to lose with their friends. If you try and do that, your friends will be unlikely to back you up in this case too, which is important because Destiny is versus all these people, right? So he has to diffuse that. He has to break that up, break up that alliance. So if he can find something that he'll argue with you on, that he'll have the whole support of everybody else in the call on, he's going to win because he's got everybody on his team. And he's singled you out on a point that I think you've like stumbled yourself into in trying to criticize him or in trying to be, hyperbolic about him. And so it ends up being super effective. The exact verbiage of the quote is nearly identical, and the resulting action 100% is. So what am I talking about? Well, right here. And I didn't ban anybody or take any type of action against them. Do you think that would be an appropriate response from me? I think they shouldn't do that is almost identical to this. He thought it was a pretty shitty thing to do, and people shouldn't be doing that. The people shouldn't be doing that in the chat, and that's obviously bad. And then we have, I think they shouldn't do that. Same thing. So we kept the quote the same too. It's important. We don't want to randomly change the wording of the quote, or we're going to lose, potentially, the effectiveness of our hypothetical. The resulting action 100% is. Nobody was banned. The verbiage of appropriate low-key requires the opposite to be inappropriate, which again, I think most people in the chat will agree, applies to not banning transphobic spammers. So like, by framing this as an appropriate response from me, if either you agree with that, like, oh yeah, that's an appropriate response from you, and lose with all of your friends, or you have to agree it's an inappropriate response, which seems like the obvious conclusion. So he's putting them in a rhetorical situation where to argue against me means you say that, so if you want to argue against me, you're going to have to use this appropriate thing. And so you're going to have to say that not banning people for saying tranny is an appropriate response, and like you're not winning if that's the wording. So like, you know, he's got this person cornered in so many different ways. You get chuckles from the audience and a huh from Vivian. I put you because I guess this was prep for Destiny at some point. I think that Destiny goes for these moments a lot, where he can speak in a logical fashion and attack the points head-on, substantively. The additional part of that is the expectation that everybody listening and in the call understands what happened and agree. The issue is this doesn't happen everywhere, right? And the verbiage used to get there may be less clear as you'd like. So in this case, luckily, Destiny was able to make it very clear what was wrong in his own words with, you know, logic and whatever. You can't always talk the way you want to get your point across, though, sometimes. It may be sometimes that it's just about asking people their way. So working with what they're saying. He worked with what they were saying here, and he formulated his argument around what they believed, and that worked out for him. Not necessarily some arbitrary right way. Every conversation is going to be different, even with the same person on the same day. You have to read what is going on, listen intently, and find the right approach to making the issue or your perspective clear and undeniable. One thing I talked about with somebody else who emailed me was about how do we effectively communicate ideas in academia. And I said that most of it is presenting your points in such a way where they don't need your explanation for the person to come away with your conclusion. So like if I can present you all the evidence and facts in such an order and presentation that everybody that reads that, even without my input, will come away with my conclusion, then that's a really good paper. So your paper in academia should stand on the merit of its own facts and its own points, and it shouldn't need you there to explain everything. If you're running into this issue where people just can't seem to understand what I'm trying to communicate here, then we have a very fundamental issue that we need to tackle. And the issue is not solved by rhetoric. It's not solved by like a better wording. It's solved by structural issues. Like you have structural issues here. You should be able to show me an outline of this idea or this theory that you're talking about, and it should make sense to me. At least for most things. Like most of the time you're not talking about something so complicated that you need all that. It should be fairly apparent what the conclusion should be based on the presentation coldly and objectively of all your points. Like it should just paint a picture for somebody that like, well, obviously this is the conclusion, because if we have all these points in this order, how could you come away with any other conclusion? And I think that gets back to Destiny's analogy about the courtroom. Yeah, you should design everything like as if you're presenting a case in court. You should present all the evidence, and you should make it to where the jurors can just look at that body of evidence, and it's difficult to come away with a different conclusion. Now, in the courtroom, you do definitely have a lot of rhetoric and like actual talking, and how you explain that stuff is going to impact how it comes off. But in academia, you more or less should be able to just put those things in the paper and people understand it. There shouldn't be a ton of intervention by you. So this is really good. I think we're all done with that. But yeah, this is what I do every single time I do rhetorical analysis on Destiny or anybody. Is generally I do this. I put my comments in the blue highlights, whatever. If you guys want this, I can give this to you. If anybody's interested, just sign off and chat about that, and I'll put a link at the end. I'll just copy that one part, not this whole thing. We reviewed the homework. We did that. We went through suggestions. Tutoring. Oh, okay. Contact Zarin to discuss email and tutoring. Is Zarin in the chat or? Oh, I'm gonna catch back up with chat. Hold on. Is the camera a little delayed? Maybe. I hate that you said that. Only now I'm noticing it. Noticing what? I'm sorry, I missed when this comment went off, Earthling. Sorry. Oh, no problem. It doesn't look delayed to me. Wait, did I miss what the colors mean, or is it arbitrary? Oh, the colors do mean stuff.